Hello everybody, welcome back to my Paragon tutorial series. Today I'm going to give you a basic introduction to the deck system, and then I'm going to pop into a bot game to give you an introduction to the mid lane and some various mechanics relating to that, whatever we can find basically. As you can see, I'm not on the account I was on before, I'm on my main account now, because I can basically. But yeah, so let's get right into it. So first of all, you've probably noticed the decks and the cards and gems and so forth. So what are they and how do they work? Well, basically, cards are the items in the game. Now what they do is they make your hero stronger in different ways. So if we look at the card Shatter Golem here, as you can see it has a cost of 13 agility points. Gives power and attack speed, which I'll get into more later, and that has the effect critical strikes, which gives you more damage. But if we look at, say, Godmother Vigilant, it's a 13 vitality cost card, which gives you some power, health, and mana, but it increases your health a lot, as you can see on the sidebar. And other cards do stuff like give you shields, put vision on targets, give you more damage, reduce ability armor, which I'll get into more later. I will talk about what armor and so on and whatever is. And some will slow people, some will stasis you, which I'll talk about later. So, those are cards. Now gems, they are also items which make your hero stronger. So you give some which, you have some which give you different stats and then have a passive thing. Some of them won't give you stats, but they do have a passive, and that just depends on which slot they go into. For example, all the slot 13, 19, and 25 have extra stats along with their passives. However, slots 7 and 1 do not have the stats, they just have passives. So then decks, basically, if I go here, decks are basically things which hold a set of cards and gems. So, what you do generally is you make a deck for a specific role or hero to help you out in the game. And to do that, you just go here, click New Deck, and then you can select affinities. So, the affinities, basically, you can have two of them. What the affinities are is they're just different sets of cards, basically. And they have different things, like, for example, here it says Growth, defensive playstyle, steadily increasing in strength, or Chaos, aggressive playstyle, pushing everything to its limit. So, generally, for most heroes, you can use any affinities you want, but some are better for others. For example, Chaos is generally a very good pick for carries. Order, however, is a very good pick for supports. Now, I personally use Death and Order for my usual carry build, but other people use maybe Knowledge and Death or Knowledge and Chaos, because there's a very good card in Knowledge, and so on. So, yeah, every deck has a different thing for each role. So, the game does give you default decks, so you don't really have to worry about deck building too much right now. But I'm going to go back to the cards here, and just delete this new deck that it created, and tell you basically what all these stats mean. Like the mana regen, that's pretty obvious on this card. What mana regen does, that's one of the stats available to you, and it just gives you extra mana. As I said in the last video, mana is basically your energy to cast abilities. Now this gives health regen and max mana. So max mana just adds on to your mana. Health regen is pretty obvious. What it does is it just regenerates your health. If we go down here, we have basic armor. So as you know, as I explained in the last video, there are two types of damage, basic damage and ability damage. What basic armor does is it basically makes you more resistant to basic damage. So if you have basic armor, you'll take less basic damage than you would without any basic armor. If you have ability armor, you'll take less ability damage. However, having basic armor will not affect how much ability damage you take, for example. Now power is an interesting stat. So what power does is it basically gives you more damage. Now it will give you both extra ability damage and extra basic damage. However, all basic damage has the same scaling with power. 1 power equals 1 basic damage, so every 1 power you have will be 1 more basic damage you deal. With abilities, they scale with power differently. So you might have a hero that has an ability that has 3 power scaling, so for every power point, you get 3 extra damage on that ability. So power is a good stat for very many roles. Power, basically, you can't go wrong with it. It's a very simple stat to go with, because it just increases your damage. However, as we'll get into more later, power and whatever will affect your role differently. Alright, so here's a card that gives ability armor, for example. So, ability armor, basically, as I mentioned, it just decreases the amount of damage you'll take. Here's a new one. Attack speed. So attack speed, basically, it's kind of complex. I mean, obviously, it just increases the time, or it decreases the time it takes for you to make an attack. So it increases the speed at which you attack. This will only affect your basic attack. It doesn't affect your ability cooldowns at all. So don't build basic, don't build attack speed on somebody who has strong abilities, for example. If they have strong basic attacks, and they scale well with attack speed, then yes, you probably should build attack speed on them. Alright. So another stat you sometimes can come across is basic armor penetration and ability armor penetration. So those basically allow you to ignore some of your enemy's basic armor. So, for example, if an enemy had a lot of basic armor, and you wanted to deal more damage to them, you could start building armor penetration, sometimes referred to as pen, so basic pen or ability pen. And that just basically removes some of their basic armor. So that, obviously, there are more stats than that. There's movement speed, there's lifesteal. Movement speed is just how fast you move. Lifesteal basically gives you health back depending on how much damage you deal to a hero. So if you have 10% lifesteal, for example, and you deal 100 damage, you'll get like 10 health back, basically. So that's lifesteal. And yeah, there's just a bunch of different stats that the gems and cards have, in addition to passives, which are very important. So depending on your hero, you'll want different passive abilities, obviously, and some cards even have active abilities, so you can activate them and they act like a new ability on your hero. For example, Blitz Rush here. When you activate it, it has a mana cost and a cooldown, just like a hero ability would, and it will cause you to dash forward 1,000 units. And hero kills reset the card's cooldown. And then other cards like Nitro Boost, they allow you to move faster for a little bit. What else is there? Thorn Diomi will return some of the damage you take. Plague Lord Malank, that just has passives. Shadow Dancer will allow you to go into the Shadow Plane for a little bit even. So yeah. So every hero has cards which work better on them. So since in this video I'm going to be talking about the mid lane mostly, I'm going to be playing a game in the mid lane, we should learn what cards and gems and stats are good for the mid lane. So in the mid lane, cards you definitely want and gems you definitely want you want them to have mana, mana regen, and power. So that means when you're in the game, the attribute points you buy should mostly be intellect and maybe some vitality, because vitality gives you extra health, and health is basically good on anyone, just so you don't die. But yeah. So when you're looking through these cards, if you end up building a deck, or you just use one of the default decks, look for cards which give you a lot of power, a lot of mana, and a lot of mana regen. Also, you should definitely look at their passive and active effects. They can be very powerful. For example, Atomic Soldier here gives you power and mana, and then the passive powerful spells, which directly just increases the damage of all your abilities by 10%, which is a very high amount, and look how much it costs, 8 intellect. And then there's another card here, Apex Predator. It gives you power and ability armor, and as you can see, it costs 7 intellect. And it has the Empowering Strikes passive. It grants you power every time you damage a hero, stacking up to 30 times. And at the max amount of stacks, you gain ability armor. So basically, every time you hit a hero, you gain more power, which means more damage. So it's very good for heroes with strong abilities. So, like I kind of implied here, in the mid lane, you want to have heroes with strong ability power. So, that's what mid laners are, basically. They're your team's main source of burst damage, usually. So what is burst damage? Well, burst damage is basically a lot of damage in a very short amount of time. So that's what you want to be looking for in a mid laner, basically. Now, of course, there are mid laners like Iggy and Scorch or Morgesh, which deal damage over time, for example. But, generally, if you look at, in the Heroes tab here, mid laners, you have Wraith, who has a snipe, which deals a lot of damage very quickly, Lieutenant Bellica, who has a bomb, which explodes, and she can shoot people with her ult, and it will deal more damage depending on how much mana they have. Gideon, he has his rocks. Gadget, she has bombs. So, yeah. And also, in addition, mid laners generally have a decent amount of utility. Now, utility is basically abilities that help you or help your team. So that can be slows, that can be stuns, so crowd control, so stuff that stops a hero from doing something. So crowd control, that can be like roots, which stops your hero from moving, or using movement abilities, or full-on stuns, which will stop an enemy from doing anything. So that's what utility is basically in it. Sometimes it even comes in different ways. For example, utility, generally people consider this to be sustain, which is a different category, but, if you heal an ally, that could be considered utility, or if you give mana to an ally, that could be considered utility. So generally, a lot of mid laners have some sort of utility. For example, Lieutenant Bellica here, she has a stun, and she can drain mana from enemies. Wraith, he can put down wards to get vision on the map or in the shadow plane. He can he can put allies in the shadow plane with him, which can be used to set up ganks, maybe. He can also send enemies back to where they were a few seconds ago using one of his abilities. So yeah, that's what mid laners do. And their role in the game is to go in the mid lane and to make sure that, obviously, the mid lane tower doesn't come down. But other roles that the mid laner has, are to stop ganks happening on your team. So, for example, if you watch the enemy jungler come out of the left side of the river, go into the right side, over to your duo lane, what you should do is you should let your duo lane know about that. Now, there's ways to do that, which I will show you in the game. In addition, one thing you need to constantly be doing is getting control over the river buffs, because the river buffs can be very helpful to your enemies, but also very helpful to you. So, because, I mean, they make you stronger and they give you mana regen, which, as I mentioned in the mid lane, is very important. Mana regen. And mana, of course. But anyways, so, that's basically the gist of the mid lane. So I'm just going to go into a solo game here. I'm going to put it on a low difficulty so I can take a lot of time to explain to you what to do. And I'm just going to kind of start explaining the basics of the game for you. Alright, so I'm in the spot game here. And I'm just going to select the mid lane role here, and as you can see it shows a bunch of heroes which can be played in the mid lane. You can choose Countess. Countess is a melee hero, but if you look at all of them, they all have the high ability power stat. Now, don't pay too much attention to the stat things because they're kind of outdated. You really need to look at each hero, research them to find out what they do, but I'm just going to pick Lieutenant Bellica here because I have experience with her, and I like her as a mid laner. So as you can see, it shows all her abilities here. She has a stun, which it shows its mana cost and cooldown, a drone, which drains mana, her ult, which deals ability damage depending on how much mana the enemy has. Her basic attack is just ranged, and then a bomb, which in an area of effect. So that means rather than going towards a single target, so like for example basic attacks, they always hit a single target. AoE attacks, they can hit more than one target, so they have an area in which they'll do something. So that can be damage, that can be whatever, basically slows, you know. And there's even other AoEs like healing auras, like that, which can heal allies around you. But anyways, I'm just gonna select my deck here. So as you can see, I have gems here, which do stuff which helps in the mid lane. So you can see that at the third slot, I have Mana Fountain, which regens mana. At the fourth slot, I have Spell Block, which stops the next enemy ability. Empowered attacks, after casting an ability, the next basic attack within 3 seconds deals bonus ability damage. Now, that's probably not the best gem to have, but, you know, whatever. So I'm just gonna, since I have 1,000 gold here, I'm going to put a point in, and instantly it unlocks my auto shield gem, which gives shield for a few seconds when I fall below 25 max health. And I'm just gonna grab this card, Advanced Evolution. So every time you level up, you gain some health regen and mana regen for a few seconds. So that's very good in the mid lane, because in the mid lane, you want to get as much XP as possible to level up so you can get your abilities very quickly, because they're powerful. So each hero has different abilities which you should upgrade first. On Bellica, for example, most people go with the Q, the Seismic Assault, because it's a stun and it can be very useful for locking your enemy down and dealing damage, or even escaping. And as you can see, we're going up against Gadget here, and she just connected a bomb to a minion, which took a few seconds to explode, and then it dealt damage. So, if I use my ability here, as you can see, it stunned her, and she couldn't move or do anything for a minute. Now, you don't want to do what I'm doing in a real game. I was just giving you an example, because I took a lot of damage there. So taking damage isn't a good idea. Now, in a real game, you really want to try not to do that, because now what's going to happen is you're going to have to go back to base. So going back to base, you do that because you always want to try not to die. You want to stay alive as much as possible, because if you die, you are letting the enemy get gold off of you and experience, which makes them stronger. So this is usually known as feeding. If you die, you're feeding the enemy team, because you give them more gold, more experience, which in turn allows them to get better cards and attributes, making them stronger. So I'm just going to collect this card right now, Font of Experience. It costs gold directly. It doesn't take an attribute. So what this basically does is it will allow me to get experience faster, so I can level up faster than the enemy. But as you can see now, also, because I had to leave lane, if you look closely, Gadget is level 3, I'm only level 2, so the enemy mid laner is ahead of me. So, what can you do about this? Well, it's time to teach you about the concept known as farming. So as you can see, there's the minion waves here. And whenever you kill them, you get gold and experience. Now there's very efficient ways to do that. For example, if you wait until the minions, their health gets red, and then you hit them with a basic attack, you'll gain more gold and experience than you would if you just let them, if you like hit them like this. Like, you'll still get gold, you'll still get experience, but you'll be getting less. So always try to get the last hits when you can on enemies. Now I'm just gonna do that. As you can see, the gold thing popped up there and I got gold. So now I have been fed basically by the enemy mid laner. So I got gold, experience, and now, like, if I open up the menu here, I can buy 2 attribute points in intellect, which in turn could allow me to get better cards. Now, one thing you always want to make sure when you're farming is you want to farm safely. So, if you were to kill all these minions as quick as you can, like as soon as they get to the red, you attack them, or maybe you just keep attacking them every so often, and you just, you know, keep doing it like that. I miss that, and I'm not a good role model. You're all the way up at this tower, and then what happens is the enemy jungler or another enemy could come from back here, or over here, and they could come right up here, and because you're so close to this tower, they could start attacking you, and you'd have a long way to run to get to safety. Like, you'd probably die if you were pushed all the way up and you got ganked. So you always want to try to stay kind of close to your tower. So what you can do is once it gets to red, don't instantly attack. Wait until the health goes down a little bit more. So, you know, you go here. Just wait a little bit. So what happens then? Damn. There's allies here, so it's kind of hard. But, yeah, he just took that. Anyways, so basically, what you want to do, a good idea is to always try, if you can, to keep, if you're in the mid lane, of course, to keep the minions around here. Sometimes, it's even better to let the enemy push close to your tower, because then what you can do is you can farm safely. You're in very little danger. Like, the enemy can't do much to you when you're in their tower, or when you're in your tower. But, since they're all the way up here, your jungler or another one of your allies could come up and kill them. Now, I'm just gonna... So Gadget is in a kind of bad place here. Low health. So Gadget is at low health in a place easily attackable, as you can see, right in this little pit here. Like, for example, the enemy jungler, or, I mean, I guess our allied jungler could come out of there and attack them, or they could come up here and come around, and then I'm down here, where I can just easily stun them, you know? So yeah, always pay attention where you're positioned, and how safe you are, because the game is about not dying more than it is about getting kills. If you get 0 kills, it's better to get 0 kills and 0 deaths in a game than it is to get 1 kill and 1 death, or 2 kills and 3 deaths, for example. You want to minimize the danger you're in. So basically, another thing you should keep in mind while you're in the mid lane is to watch the river buffs. So the river buffs, they are very important to you. They give you mana regen, which allows you to stay in lane longer, and they can make you stronger. So this can allow you to better take on your opponent. So I just got these amplification orbs. Now, if I needed mana regen, or if I needed more mana, if I used a bunch of abilities, like if I just kept shooting off abilities like this, That must have been a bug. It doesn't appear that my bomb went off. There we go. If I keep doing that, if I keep throwing down abilities, as you can see, I lost a lot of mana. So, it's usually a good idea to... Alright, this is also another thing you shouldn't do. You shouldn't tower dive. You shouldn't go through towers. Because as you can see, I took a lot of damage there. So, like I said before, always try to be careful. Always try not to take damage. Always try to minimize how much danger you put yourself in. And while you're in the mid lane, you want to go for river buffs, of course. Now, but there's another thing that I haven't mentioned yet. And just so you know, as you can see here, over time I'm replacing my cards with stronger ones, and I'm putting more attribute points in. You never want to forget to buy attribute points because they make you stronger. You never want to forget to buy cards because they make you stronger. But anyways. So now, because this is a bot game, like, it goes by pretty quickly. But in a real game, they don't go by this quickly. So, in a real game, what you want to do when the game starts off, in the early game, you want to try to farm as safely as possible. So you want to get as many last hits as possible, and if you look in the info box below, to the side, also as you can see, I have my health and mana down there. It's a setting. I just like it there. Don't worry about it if you don't like it. It can be on... It's by default on the top of the screen. But anyways, if you look next to my kills, deaths, and assists, you'll see a strange symbol with 23 next to it. That's how many last hits I have. So the more last hits you get, the more gold you have, and the more experience you have, which makes you stronger. So you always want to try to farm as much as you can. Because... oh my. You always want to try to out-farm your enemies. Because that will make it so that you can get stronger than them, and then you can be a threat to the enemy team. If you let the enemy out-farm you, you're not much of a threat. So anyways, now, as you can see, we killed the entire enemy team there. And now my team is over here killing the Orb Prime. Orb Prime, which I mentioned in the other video, which gives, that it gives your team a buff. Now as you can see, it does various attacks, and we killed it, and it gives, a bunch of, stuff to us. As you can see, I just got a lot of health regen, a lot of mana regen, and a damage bonus. And you can tell by my, the purple glow around me. And if you look at the side, it says that the Prime Helix buff lasts for 125 more seconds. Now, for example, if I went over here and went into this inhibitor and died, which you should never do this, please, I go into the respawn timer. So as the game goes on, respawn timers get longer. So basically what that means is, if you die in the early game, you're only going to have a few seconds, a few seconds to respawn. So you'll die, and almost instantly you'll be back at base, ready to go back into lane. However, late game, or later on in the game, this time increases. So later on, you could get respawn timers up to 80 seconds. So at that point, your team is now at a disadvantage, because you're dead for a long time, so that's one less person on the map, so that's one less person to attack and defend with. So the other team can start going after objectives like Orb Prime there. But as you can see, now that I died, I no longer have the purple glow around me, or the Orb Prime buff. But if you look at the Fae here, she still does have the Orb Prime buff. So when you die, you lose the Orb Prime buff. Now, if we were to go over here to Fangtooth, which, I guess it was killed by your team. So anyways, well, as you can see, I should have just looked at the sidebar. It says Mark of Fangtooth. So basically that means we have the Fangtooth buff. Now if I die, or if you die, you don't lose the Fangtooth buff. So the entire team gets the Fangtooth buff whenever it's killed. And that's just a permanent buff, which you'll have for the rest of the game. Now, so you always want to be sure to make sure that the enemy doesn't get Fangtooth, because at that point, and I had some nice lag there, and as you can see just there, I did a lot of damage to him, Twin Blast there, but it was all very quick. It was all burst damage. Now, if you look at another hero here, Sparrow, who's currently in the mid lane, she deals more, she deals high damage per second. She's a carry, so she doesn't deal all the damage all at once, but she still does a lot of damage. Like, for example, if I use my stun, it's on a 10-second cooldown. I can't use that damage again for 10 seconds. If I were to attack something with my basic attack, it wouldn't do much damage at all, and if I attack something with my bomb, it, I can't use it for a few more seconds now. So that's what burst damage is. And that was embarrassing. So burst damage, basically, is just very quick, fast damage. So now, if you go over here, you'll notice that Fangtooth just spawned. So one thing you want to do is, basically, whenever you have one more ally alive, and be sure that your lanes are pushed up towards the enemy. As you can see over there, the lane is pushed against our tower. So I'm going to use this to give you a good lesson on what to do in the game if the Fae doesn't come over there and mess with it. I'm just going to grab this buff here. I was hoping it was a speed buff. Alright, I guess the Fae is going to come and mess with it. But one thing you should always try to do whenever you leave a lane for a team fight or to grab an objective is to set the lane. So what a set lane is basically, it's when your wave of minions has more minions in it than the enemy wave. So it will push towards the enemy without you having to do anything. So if I let this wave go here, you just count how many minions there are. As you can see, there's one ranged minion. We have two ranged minions, so even though they have more melee minions, our lane is probably gonna push. Now, just to make sure, of course, you can deal some more damage, kill a few, but yeah. So our lane is gonna push because we have more minions. So I can leave, and this lane is gonna push up to the enemy. So then somebody from the team is going to have to respond to that. They're going to have to go take care of those minions, or somebody, the enemy is going to lose that inhibitor if nobody on the enemy team goes to respond. So during that time, it makes it safer for you to take objectives like Fangtooth, or like Rampage just did with Fangtooth, or, as me and Rampage are doing right now, pushing this lane up to the enemy inhibitor and taking it down. So one thing that I failed to mention in this video, which you should always do as a mid laner, is if your enemy mid laner ever leaves the game, or you see somebody going across the mid lane, what you can do is you can press C. Now this will open this menu here, and you just move your mouse, and you can, select certain things to send messages to your team. So for example, or notify, or not notify, defend, careful, and then, like, if somebody left your lane to go to another lane, you could be like, hey, careful right lane, and then it will show on the side here, careful right lane, and then on the mini-map it will show a marker to be careful on the right lane, so that's good for letting your teammates know what to do. And another thing you should do as a mid laner, kind of early on, you should make sure to have all your abilities when you do this, is what you can do. Let's say you had your wave pushed all the way up to the enemy tower, or the enemy left the lane or whatever. What you can do is go to another lane and try to help them get a kill, so they can push their lane up and be more aggressive, for example. So I could go over to the duo lane, help the duo laners kill the enemy duo laners, and then return to my lane to keep on pushing and farming. But you should only do that when your tower isn't going to be under attack. So when your lane is pushed all the way up to the enemy, and when or when the enemy has left their lane and your lane is pushing towards them. So that's referred to as rotations. So leaving your lane to go to another lane is referred to as a rotation, and also going towards leaving lane to go to an objective, that's also known as a rotation. So rotations are very important. And then ganking, of course, is when somebody else comes to a lane and attacks. So that basically goes hand in hand with rotations. But yeah, that's I'd say just a quick basic guide on the role of mid lane. So to sum it up, you want to be going for cards which give you high ability damage, mana and mana regen. You want to be building into the intellect attribute, so you get more mana and mana regen and gems which help you in the mid lane. And then you want to make sure to keep your allies safe by telling them where enemies are, when enemies leave, where they're going, whatever. And you want to keep control of the river buffs. You want to make sure objectives like Fangtooth and Orb Prime don't get taken, because you're very close, so you can easily just pop into the jungle, look at them, and see. Now, there's other ways that this is done. Like, generally, people will put down wards at the objectives, so you can have vision on the map. I'll go into that more a few episodes later, probably whenever I do the carry role video. And then, of course, I'll go more into wards and more complex things you can do in the mid lane once I get to the later parts of this series, where I start going into real PvP games to show how I'd play a certain role in an actual match against other people. So I hope you enjoyed this video. It was just a very basic summary of the duties and role of the mid laner. And if you wanna, after this, go into a bot game, try out the mid lane maybe, see if you like it, play a hero in a mid lane. Just try to do the things I told you. Remember to farm to get those last hits so you can get gold, so you can get more powerful. Always remember to upgrade your abilities, to upgrade attributes, to get new cards so you're more powerful. And above all else, just be careful and try to get the enemy's tower down before they get yours down. As simple as it may sound. Some people don't do that. And again, remember that kills aren't as important as staying alive and getting objectives is. So, as always, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, leave comments down below for suggestions and feedback, and I'll see you next time.